Good afternoon, this is David T from Field Sports Scotland, and I am coming to you with another episode of FSS Chat Back. This is my weekly podcast. This will be episode 13, where this week we are going to talk about how to get into professional deer stalking and become a professional stalker. Now, this is a very difficult one. I am going to be honest with you. This is my third attempt at doing this podcast. I have a couple of hours of footage that I went through last night, and I didn't quite like what I said, and I think it's because it's really hard. First of all, we'll get past that a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a little minute. What have I been up to this week? Well, I've been stalking, as that's what my job is, so that's what I've been doing, carrying on with replant management, basically keeping an eye on the replants that we have got planted up, and stopping the male deer from coming in. We've got female deer coming in, but not doing any damage, which is great. But that is basically keeping an eye on the restocks is my big priority at the moment, specifically one where we've invested quite a lot of money into it. So we're carrying on that. I've just been talking over contracts and stuff like that. I've been dealing with syndicates. So it's been all about the deer stalking. It's been a busy week. And that got me to question about getting into this job. You know, I've had quite a few people ask me over the last 5 to 6 months. And do you know what? I could be very emotive about this, and I'm probably going to be brutally honest, even though this is my third take, as I said, on doing this podcast, because it's very, very difficult for me to tell you how to get into professional deer stalking when it was very difficult for me to get into professional deer stalking. I grew up in the industry. I grew up in an area where 90% of the people who lived around me either worked on deer or worked on estates. So it was basically, I was kind of expected that I was going to be in this industry in some way or form. And I chose the stalking side because of the fact is I'm good at it. Actually, no, I'm good at killing deer. That is pretty much what people hire me for, is to kill deer. And a lot of people will say that's not proper stalking, and in many ways it is. There's times where I get frustrated at myself because of the route that I took, but that's mainly because of the fact that, yeah, I wanted to be a traditional stalker like all the people I looked up to in my life when I was younger, but landed up just getting involved in culling, and I really had a passion for gamekeeping. When I was younger, real passion for grouse keeping, but I had to take a break from that, and I went into security for a long time. So when I came back in, the only options that were available to me as a late 20s, early 30s person was to go back into deer stalking at contract level, which meant that I had to start from scratch. It also meant that I had the pitfalls of trying to do things too quickly, trying to probably go down the wrong route of doing things. I've got a bit of a cold, as you can probably hear in my voice today. There's a bit of a head cold going about. So if you're struggling to hear me or struggling to understand me, give me a shout in the comments, because I feel like I'm struggling to understand myself at the moment. However, we're going to battle through with this. So over the last couple of weeks, people have been asking me, and I get this quite a lot throughout the year, especially guys who come into recreational stalking and stuff. Ask me, how do you get into it professionally? Now, if it was a 15-year-old school leaver asking me, I would definitely turn around and say, well, there is ways you can get in. Even if you grow up in the towns or cities, there is an ample amount of colleges up and down the country, from the south coast to the Midlands to the north of England to the borders to central Scotland and to the Highlands. So there is a number of colleges in the UK that are offering gamekeeping or wildlife management courses that incorporate gamekeeping and deer stalking. And all of those have similar things in common, similar qualifications in common, and that in a way means that the doors are open for your 15, 16, 17-year-olds, so up to 20-year-olds, to get into these courses. You can join these courses as a mature student and doing individual modules and stuff like that. Some colleges allow that. Each college has a different curriculum. They don't follow the same curriculum, which is a bit frustrating. It's usually down to what the local estates are requiring. So what happens is the college will adapt to what is required locally, to be honest. How the apprenticeship schemes usually work, when you're a junior, you get a position on an estate as an apprentice. You do your 3 weeks on site at the estate where you live, work, and do everything that gamekeepers do on the estate, and then you might get a small wage for it, and then you have a 1 week at college once a month, or during the summer months you don't have any college, obviously, but genuinely 90% of the time you are on the estate. Yeah, you're learning hands-on the estate, and that gives you not just a qualification but gives you the experience. So you could be there 2 to 3 years. Most of these courses require 2 years being on the estate with placements at college for your gamekeeping ME, which is a modern apprenticeship. There is more advanced college and university courses where you could learn wildlife management, wildlife ecology, and that's going down more of the ecology route. And in doing that, you can open yourself up to other jobs, which is in conservation or environmental, or that can lead to other jobs in conservation and working for rewilding and stuff like that, and more scientific roles. However, in regards to deer stalking, most of these courses do not offer the DSC1 or the DSC2, or they might offer the DSC1 but do not offer the DSC2, so you don't get your professional hunter status. And that is where it can be a bit problematic of wasting those 2 years and then still having to pay for these courses via BASC or whatever. BASC also offer gamekeeping courses and in individual modules. They do various courses that might not get qualified in your college course as well. So you really need to do the research in what you want to do in regards to the college course that you're doing. The other thing I've noticed that some of your college courses do not have a lot of modules on deer stalking itself. Mostly it's about moorland management, game bird management, husbandry, that sort of stuff. And that can be probably a little bit harder for you to get into the stalking industry through the channels of actually just going from college to be a stalker, because that doesn't quite work like that. Unless you're positioned on a predominantly stalking estate, the rain, you probably can hear the rain above me. The rain is just absolutely horrendous right now. Unless you are on a predominantly stalking estate going through the course and then you're learning all the extra bits, then it doesn't really benefit you that well. If you're on a pheasant estate, for instance, that does very little deer stalking or no deer stalking at all, you might not pick up any deer stalking experience or qualifications in that course. So research your course and research your college before you decide to go to it. And as I said, because these colleges are so widespread and their curriculums vary slightly, I would suggest shopping around the colleges and seeing what each college offers, because that might suit you. But that also coincides with the estate that you might want to put yourself on as a trainee keeper, because if it's too far away and it's not within the catchment area of that college, a lot of colleges work with these estates, and that's how the apprenticeship system works. Genuinely, you could find yourself being stuck with whatever you could get. But the one thing as a teenager, learning to be going to college and doing that sort of thing, is you will gain future friends in the industry. The guys you go to college will, one or two of them in the future, will most likely be a head keeper or head stalker or something like that in the industry, and they will throw jobs at each other because they're all friends. So make friends. And another thing is being a junior keeper is that you do get invited to a heck of a lot of shoots. Especially if you're part of an estate who has, the owner has 2 or 3 estates, you might get a chance to work on 4 or 5 different estates, and that will open doors. It's all about shaking hands. And you'll probably hear throughout my podcast today that getting into this industry is all about who you know and not what you know. And that, for some people, can be pretty difficult in a way, because I guess what happens is that people just trust the people they know instead of bringing in new people, new blood. So shaking hands is very, very important. Now, that's we covered the teenager side of things. What if you are in your mid-20s and you're interested in a career in deer stalking? Well, the other option is find a gillie job. If you're single, we're talking younger folk here, usually they're single, they've got no ties, find a summer gillie job. There's plenty of that go on the boards on SGA and stuff like that. Just keep an eye on the adverts. And as a gillie, you might spend the whole summer and October seasons just staying in a bothy and just working on the estate. And pretty much, it's not great pay. Some pays are £60 a day, sometimes it's £120 a day, and it's long days. We're talking minimum wage here. We're talking proper minimum wage work, but it gets you a foot in the door. And if you do work hard, you will be invited again to do more gillying. And if you've got an interest and you've got your firearms certificate and stuff like that, that estate might say, well, okay, why don't you train up to be a stalker? You start off as a stalker / gillie, doing a bit of both, and then before you know it, when retirements come in and stuff like that, or people move to other jobs, you might get that option. So it opens a door. Basically, it is just about opening doors. In your 20s, that's fine. When you've not got a family, or your late teens, early 20s, you've not got a family, you've got no ties, you can go and stay in a bothy for a whole summer and be isolated and enjoy the social aspect of dealing with guests and stuff like that. However, that when you're in your 30s and 40s and you've got a family, you've got a house, you've got bills to pay, you've got all that, how do you get into it if you've never been in the stalking industry before? You're just new. You've just spent a couple of years learning to stalk yourself. You might have taken a syndicate place, or you might just been doing recreational stalking, and you have decided that this is a job you want to do for the rest of your life. It's not impossible. It just depends how many hands you've shaked and how prominent you have been on the estates that you have been stalking on recreationally, and the contacts you've made over that couple of years. But I'm going to be brutally honest here, it will be extremely hard. It'll be hard for you financially. It'll be hard for you, if you did get a position, it'll be hard for you financially. Bearing in mind the average stalker's wage is around about $24,000 a year to $30,000 a year. Yes, there is a chance of having a house and a vehicle and all that supplied, but bearing in mind that's only to the term of your contract. So if that estate gets sold on, which happens quite regularly, if that estate gets sold on, they might not require your services after a couple of years because the new owner might not require your services. And before you know it, you're homeless. There's a lot of decisions to make when you come into deer stalking as a professional on an estate. I'm lucky the job that I do is basically not far away from where I live. So I have my own house. I've got my own I do not have anything tied with the estate. I use most of my own equipment, which has got its own downsides as well. If you're in your late 30s, early 40s, and you have a bit of money and stuff like that, try and get into it part-time and not full-time, not as a full-time stalker. Try and get a lease of land or manage deer on land and start taking the odd guests out. But bearing in mind your insurances, like my insurance for taking guests out is like around about £600 a year. So you have to make that money up. You also have to think about the location of the ground that you're managing and your location where you stay. If you're having to travel three hours, for instance, to get onto the ground, like what I have to do with guests sometimes, you have to look at fuel costs. That's a 6-hour round trip. Plus you've got your stalking day. Your days can be long. It's not unusual for me to leave the house if I'm doing private stalking days on one of the forestry blocks that I help manage. It's not unusual for me to leave the house at 2 a.m. to be up there for around about 5 a.m., spend a whole day with guests till about 6, 7 o'clock at night, sometimes later, and not getting back until 6, 7 o'clock the next morning. And then you have to look at the amount of money you might have charged. If you've got one guy that's paid £550 for that day, you've got the lease of the ground for the day, you've got your fuel, your expenses, and your wage for the day, you might only come out with around about £30 or £40 as a wage. So bear that in mind. That can be quite difficult. It's a lifestyle choice when you're in your 30s and 40s. It's not a job you're going to make lots of money off it. Unless you get a great lease and syndicate out at stupid amount of money, which doesn't benefit you either, because if you get caught at that, you will get a lot of grief in the stalking industry, and they already give grief to syndicates and stuff like that, just because people expect deer stalking for free. They expect you to put out your time, your money, and everything else, and them to get it for free or as little cost as possible. And they don't actually understand. This is the problem with it. Especially with guys or girls who want to get into this professionally, but they're having to put their own money into it. They don't understand the amount of money it takes to just provide one day's stalking. It's unbelievable. Now, it's not a living wage you'll ever make out of it. Unless you're taking 3 or 4 guests a day, every day of the week, you are not going to make any big money out of this. And that's a fact. There's times where I completely struggle to make the bills if I didn't have other things, or if I wasn't full-time, if I wasn't on the estate and making money from the estate, I genuinely would be broke. I would be. So, as an older person coming into deer stalking, as a professional, and doing your own guides and stock, you really have to weigh up the costs and actually properly do your accounts, because it's difficult. Now, going back to being a young person, let's look at the pitfalls of full-time stalking on an estate. Say that you are lucky enough as a young person to get a job as a stalker on an estate. One of the biggest killers in this industry is suicide, because the fact is, stalkers, gamekeepers, etc., it's a very isolated, lonely job 90% of the time. If you do not like your own company and you are not used to being by yourself, then you're going to struggle. If you're a social person, deer stalking is not for you. Even in the syndicate level, deer stalking is not a sociable gathering of guys who are going out, or guys and girls who are going out stalking. 90% of the time it is by themselves. The most successful stalkers will always shoot more by themselves than with someone else. Yes, it can be sociable. Yes, you can take guests and stuff like that out. But you might only have, as a professional deer stalker on an estate, you might only have 4 or 5 guests a year. You're not going to have guests every day of the week. That's why a lot of estates don't just require the deer stalker to just stalk deer. They want them to manage sheep, or they want them to manage cattle, or maybe doing a bit of river gillying, or doing the odd rough shoot and things like that. Now, there is a difference between stalkers and gamekeepers. There is many gamekeepers who are stalkers, but there's not many stalkers who are gamekeepers. There is a big divide by that. Stalkers mainly manage deer. They mainly shoot deer. They might do little bits of rush shooting and organise fishing trips and stuff like that. But their predominant job is the deer. Now, a lot of estates are now requiring that stalker to do a little bit more than just stalking. As I said, they might ask them to do some shepherding along with the stalking. Now, I know an estate who, not far away from me, who basically looked for a stalker to manage the deer, but each person I've spoke to who has went to that job, now they've had a turnover of stalkers quite a lot, they spent 90% of them managing sheep than what they have managing deer, with very little emphasis on the deer stalking. Now, the other thing you've got to think about is financially, it isn't a rich thing. You're never going to be rich becoming a stalker. The stalker on a estate, as I said, between £24,000 and £30,000 a year. And if you're making £24,000, that is minimum wage. In fact, it's below minimum wage if you actually look at the amount of work you have to put into it. They also, it's a 24-hour day job. So you're not you're not coming in at 9 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 5 o'clock at night. You could be fencing from 6 o'clock in the morning straight through to 9 o'clock at night in the summertime. Like, we don't get dark until near on midnight now. So you'll make the use of the daylight hours when it's there. You could be up at 2 o'clock in the morning and just prepping for guests that are coming in at 5 o'clock in the morning. You could be coming in at midnight and then back out again at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's just dependent on the grounds that you're at. So it's not a lifestyle where if you're used to doing 9 till 5, you might find yourself doing, at some periods, 20 hours a day. And if you're working 20 hours a day and you're only making £24,000 a year, do the calculation, you are probably making half of what a minimum wage is. You will be required as well, if you're on an estate, to be on call for anything that happens on the estate, from maintenance issues and stuff like that. And yes, it becomes a lifestyle job, and it becomes a 24-hour a day job. Now, this is where it becomes very hard for folk in their later stages of life who have never been brought up in the industry, because they don't understand. They haven't been brought up in a way that that lifestyle has, try to find my words here, that lifestyle has taught them to be. So they're not used to getting up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and feeding stags, and then in the winter time, and then carrying on and doing fencing and doing all sorts of jobs and stuff like that. When you grow up in the industry, you expect to be on the ground when you can get on the ground all the time. And if you've got a family, that makes it hard for them, because it's really hard for them to understand what you're doing all day. And it genuinely, that's where the crux of it all is. That's why they prefer people who have grown up in the industry, because they understand the isolation, they understand the pitfalls, they understand the insecurities of the job, they understand what is expected of them in regards to the job. And it is hard work. It really is. Even doing 5 or 6 hours a day stalking every single day can be hard work. Now, the industry is changing. I have to admit, the days of the recreational sporting estates or Victorian style estates are going to be over. And I did predict this many years ago. With the new deer management, nature restoration orders coming in and various other legislation coming in and the increased emphasis on culling deer, the job of a traditional estate stalker is going to change. I can almost guarantee you at some point somebody is going to ban feeding stags in the wintertime. The Nature Scot will put a restriction on it or ban it. It will be less about herd management for quality of herd to just culling numbers. So the job will be just culling. And that means in the wintertime, like what I do, you will be working all the way through the night culling deer. And you will be working all the way through during the day culling deer. And that in itself can be difficult. You'll be culling deer out of season. That possibly hinds that are heavily pregnant, and this is the requirements that's going to be put on stalkers in the future, and I kid you not, that's going to be very, very difficult for those who have grown up in the industry, but it will be equally, and if not more difficult, for people who are just coming into the industry. It is not going to be the romantic stalking across Highland Hills job that people are used to seeing. Guys in deerstalker hats and spying into a group of majestic stags and stalking in and taking one. No, the requirement will be that you're out there 10 hours just shooting herds of deer. That is what the requirement is going to be for at least a short period, or for a minimum of 5 years, at least 6 years. So think about that as well, the new legislation. Do me a favour, no matter if you want to get into it, it's not a bad job. Look, I do it. I can cope. I know what to expect. But just remember, if you've got a really good paying job, and I know you're a bit bored with life or whatever, use that job to pay for your stalking. Don't use stalking to pay for your life, because you'll get very little enjoyment out of it and you'll start losing interest. It's a very, very difficult industry. That's my best advice. If you've got a good money where you are, you're coming up to retirement maybe, and you've got a bit of a nest egg, enjoy your stalking. Because when it becomes a vocation, it can become a chore. And there is lots of politics involved in it right now, and it's very difficult to navigate through it for everybody. And put it this way, if you're a contractor, getting on an estate is not going to be easy. It's really, really hard industry at the moment. And I'm going to make this a little bit longer episode than the half an hour that I normally do. The one thing I'm going to be brutally honest about is that when stalking jobs come up, those estates already have an idea who they're going to take on. No matter how many hands you've shaken, how many butts you've kissed, how many times you've done a freebie for somebody, or the amount of advice that you have given someone, if the estate has already decided who they're going to take on, remember, all your contacts if you're a junior keeper at college, all those contacts, these guys will all be, and you're been in the industry 5-10 years, these guys will all have their friends and friends and friends of friends and family of friends. They will all get priority over somebody who is an unknown coming into the industry. And even if the estate advert says minimum 10 years stalking experience, blah, 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 the chances of you even getting an interview is going to be slim to none. There's a lot of prejudices in this business. There's a lot of hidden prejudices in this business. You might apply for 100 jobs and only get an interview for one, or not even get an interview. In the past, I have struggled with that. I really have struggled with that. There is guys, there's stalkers. I'm going to be honest here. I'll be fully, brutally honest, right? There is stalkers, head stalkers and head gamekeepers out there from estates who have messaged me or phoned me and spent hours, literally hours on the phone with them, asking me advice on certain stuff. They have used my advice and kept my advice, and they have, but when they've got jobs coming up on their estates, I've not even had an interview for them, and they know who I am. You know, that frustrated me for a long time, and it was nothing to do with my ability to manage deer. It was to do with the perception that I shot a lot of deer, or I was involved in large culls and forestry, and at the time, that wasn't the done thing. So it's changing now, don't get me wrong, it is changing. A lot more estates will be requiring contractors over full-time estate stalkers. There's benefits to that. There is benefits to a full-time to a contractor than what there is to have a full-time estate stalker. One thing, you swap liability for the deer management. With the new deer management nature restoration orders, all legal liability for deer management will no longer be up to the estate. It could be down to the individual deer manager it is contracted to. But if you want to get into it, if you really do want to get into it, don't let all the bad stuff put you off. Just do your research. Just look at how it might affect your life. Because the red tape in the politics is very, very difficult to get around and get out of. I've got a close friend and colleague that at the moment they are thinking about just getting out of it altogether, you know, and because of the politics. So just bear that in mind. I said I was going to be brutally honest. So, happy hunting, and I'll catch you next week.